Hey guys, okay, welcome over. It looks like everybody that wants to get over. Hopefully, I know how I'm up under the because I got both of these. So some people are still testimony on the room is over. So I still kind of got that room open. So hopefully, it doesn't sound terrible in here. Um, Leah, I still don't know. She didn't get any life insurance. They didn't have any life insurance. She never had a policy. Then she lied about everything. Absolutely everything. Everything. Lied about everything. So there was no one. But I'm breaking up. Okay. Okay. It's not gonna let me talk. I got that open. And I thought it was gonna let me talk, but it's not.
Please be seated. We're going to go on the record. It is March 20th, 2026. This is case number 251-401-132, State of Utah versus Sundwall. Welcome back, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Ready to get started, counsel?
We are, Your Honor. Defense calls Dr. Kyle Hancock.
Thank you. Good morning. Please come forward. Come up here near the clerk and we'll get you sworn in.
You do solemnly swear the testimony you shall give in the case now before the court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes.
Thank you.
Come on up and have a seat. Appreciate you being here. As long as you can keep that mic in front of you, we'll be able to make a good record and we'll all be able to hear.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Dr. Hancock.
Good morning.
I'm going to ask what every witness has to be asked, which is for you to state and spell your name.
Kyle Hancock, Hancock.
Dr. Hancock, what do you do for a living?
I am a licensed psychologist. I provide both clinical and forensic psychological services.
How long have you done that?
I've been licensed since the spring of 2010.
And so do you, let's get a little bit of a background on how you get to the point where you get licensed for clinical psychology and psychologist and a forensic psychologist. You're not a psychiatrist, right?
I am not a psychiatrist.
And I just said that word, so that's what I wanted to clear up. What kind of training and things do you have to do to get to that level?
So I have a bachelor's degree in psychology. I have a master's degree in school psychology, and I have a combined clinical counseling and school psychology PhD. After I completed my pre-doctoral internship, I completed 1 year of postdoctoral fellowship. And after that, I completed postdoctoral specialization training and supervision in forensic psychology.
Do you also have a clinical practice?
Yes.
First, let's just describe what a clinical practice is and what it means and what you do.
Yeah. Clinical psychology practice is where I basically help support people who choose to come and see me. Oftentimes they report life experiences that are unpleasant or challenging. And my job is basically healthcare. It's to assist them in finding ways to improve their quality of life.
How long have you done clinical practice work?
I've been licensed since 2010. I graduated in 2009, and so I was a certified psychology resident for 6 months under supervision. I've been licensed since 2010.
So you've seen people in the clinical setting since 2010,
2009.
2009?
Yeah.
And how big a part of your work and your practice is the clinical side, seeing people and assessing people and understanding people?
That was the majority of my practice, 2009 through about 2020. I was working probably 35-ish hours a week most of the time. 2010, 2015 was probably closer to 40, 45. In 2020, I transitioned more and more into forensic psychology, and now only seeing about 5 patients a week, 6 patients a week for the clinical side. Everything else since about 2020 has grown more and more into forensic psychology.
Forensic psychology, can you help us understand what that means?
Yes, that's where psychologists have a role in the lives of people who are somehow involved in a court system. So one of the things I do is help measure individuals' abilities and experiences when they report having disabilities that make it difficult or impossible for them to work. And in that role, my job is to identify what their abilities are and to give that information to people who make decisions about what supports they benefit from. Another role in forensic is I work with families going through divorce who are having difficulties deciding how to organize time with children and so forth. And I complete very comprehensive evaluations. I gather a lot of information, and I make recommendations to the court about what would be best for children in their family system. And another thing that I do is I work with people who are going through a legal process, either on the criminal side or the civil side, and I consult or provide expert testimony so that jurors or other finders of fact may have some information from my science that they may or may not find helpful as they consider the facts of a case.
In that regard, if I heard you right, you've been involved in the court process through a variety of kinds of lawsuits. Is that right?
Yes, I started that in 2012 and just got bigger and bigger.
I think you said civil. Some are non-criminal court cases like divorce and custody and such.
Yes.
You're involved. Have you been involved in your work in the criminal justice system?
Yes.
Have you been an expert witness?
Yes.
How many times?
On average, I'm an expert probably 2 times a month, give or take, throughout a year.
Now, some of your work in the criminal justice expert witness realm work in consultation that does not ultimately involve you testifying in court?
Yes.
And then sometimes you come and testify and you describe the why and what information you may be called upon to give to a jury. Let's just talk about testifying. I mean, how often and how much have you testified to educate jurors?
So testimony is when I say probably twice a month. I'm in court as doing testimony, not doing testimony, providing review of records or consulting on a case or giving feedback. That's probably a couple of weeks a month on average of some variety or another.
And of course, there are in the criminal justice setting, there's 2 sides, right?
Yes.
There's a prosecution and a defense, and I'm going to clarify. Do you testify and do you work with and prosecuting entities and ultimately testify for prosecutions?
Yes.
And have you done some testifying for the defense capacity in actual court cases and court testimony?
Yes.
Let's talk about comparing how often you are asked to do that for either side. What is sort of the percentage of times that you're on the witness stand for the prosecution?
Where I'm actually sharing testimony, that's probably about 25% defense and 75% prosecution in the last year. From 2018 to 2022 was probably closer to 90% prosecution, 10% defense through those years where I was sharing testimony.
Where's your practice?
In Logan, Utah.
Do you work around the state in this capacity? In other words, you said you gave those percentages for testifying for the prosecution. Are those a variety of jurisdictions?
Yes, so as far north as Logan, I've gone to Idaho a couple of times. I've gone as far south as Fillmore, I think it's Millard County. Mostly in first and third and second district courts most of the time.
Let's get to what I've asked you to do. Obviously been hired by me on behalf of Ms. Sundwall, right?
Yes,
And I asked you in the capacity that you just described to do your best to assess, you may have to repeat it, but assess the sorts of information that you may consult on with the facts and persons involved in the present case.
yes,
Okay.
that's what I was asked to do.
All right, and to ask you to do that, you got, did I provide materials to you?
Yes,
Now, let's get to that so we know what you've used. The jury, the participants at this point in the trial are pretty aware of some of the kinds of information and communications. Were you given access to police reports?
yes. Well, I have some police reports. I don't know what all is in the case file. I just know that I have some, yes.
Do you have police reports that, among other things, contained the description by Detective Farney of what she was reviewing as part of 28,000 text messages between Meggan and a Casey Terry?
Yes,
Were you also provided bundles and groups of emails and text communications and other data from phone downloads by the defense?
yes.
And some of that was it even greater and different than what was put in by Detective Farney into her actual report?
I believe so, yes. It was a high volume of communications.
You didn't receive 28,000.
I don't believe that was the number, but it was thousands of pages.
Okay. Did you review that information?
I did, yes.
No, you said of course, you don't know if there's reports that you didn't get. Because,
Yes,
is it fair that you rely on the defense to give you what's called discovery materials?
yes, I receive information. I review that information and provide consultation feedback on the data I receive.
Was that part of doing that? Was it by sharing links with? Let me ask you. I'm not sure it's clear yet. As a forensic psychologist, and in this capacity, we talked about the criminal justice system. You know what discovery materials are?
Yes,
Tell the jury what discovery materials are. What I meant by that.
it's information that's obtained through the course of an investigation involving an alleged crime that's utilized as part of the judicial process, bringing about charges and then having those charges going through a judicial process.
Who provides discovery in a criminal case?
The investigators, so typically the prosecution's service team.
So the prosecution gives the discovery, and then were you provided these materials, these thousands of pages, by means of even links to platforms like OneDrive that we use?
Yes,
And you said that included police reports, including did it include a 444-page report that was prepared by Detective Farney?
yes. It's 400 and something pages, so I'm assuming that's the one.
Okay. Did you also receive some transcripts from prior court proceeding?
Yes, I did.
Did you receive, okay, we talked about communications that were collected and presented in the discovery. that were between Casey Terry and Meggan Sundwall. But did you also receive communications that were pulled off of electronic devices, for instance, between these two, Meggan and Casey, and other individuals? Between, for instance, let's just focus on Casey for a minute. Between she and other individuals that were on the phone.
Yes, I reviewed communications between Ms. Terry and other individuals.
Let's, for clarification and knowing what you used and looked at to render some of the information you're going to give about this case today, did you look at communications with Lee Randall?
Yes,
Renee Randall?
yes,
Between, for instance, Casey Terry and Michelle Tingy?
yes,
While I do this, I just gave those names because the jury's actually heard those two testify, that being Lee and Renee. Though you understand those to be Meggan Sundwall's parents?
that's my understanding, yes.
Then Michelle Tingy, I don't know that we've heard much about her. Did you understand her to be a friend of Casey Terry's?
Yes,
And so you were able to see some of the way Casey Terry communicated with Michelle Tingy?
yes,
How about Christian Clements?
yes,
I don't think we've heard much in this trial yet about that. Was Christian Clements a friend of Casey Terry's, apparently?
that's what the communications would indicate.
Now, I think we have heard some things. Did those communications indicate to you that she was involved in drug transaction with Christian Clements?
That was what the communications would appear to indicate to me. There were frequent discussions about use of or acquisition of drugs or illegal substances.
Then how about Mark Farnsworth, communications that existed with a Mark Farnsworth?
Yes,
A Kaylin.
yes,
And I think there's been some discussion here, but did you understand that to be Casey Terry's aunt?
that's my understanding, yes.
And then Kylie Clark.
Yes,
Kylie, you understood to be Casey Terry's sister.
yes,
Did you look at some text information with a Casey Tanner?
yes,
Do you understand Casey Tanner to be Casey Terry's sometimes husband?
my understanding is they've previously been married and divorced, yes.
There were, let me just go through for the interest of sort of time. Were there other people that you were able to that might be acquaintances or friends of Casey Terry's as well that you would review towards the ends of being able to give the information we're going to ask?
There was also someone named Sue. There was reference to someone named, I believe the name on the communication was Liza Rue. And there may have been others. It was,
There's a Ty Wendell. Was Ty Wendell also someone sort of was in the loop with the Christian Clements and that sort of?
there was a reference to that person, if my memory is correct, in the communications I reviewed, yes.
And last, a Kevin Story.
Yes, I do remember that name.
And did you understand from those communications that'd be another friend of Casey's?
My understanding, there were some kind of associates, friends of some variety was what it appeared to be from the communications.
Okay. You let me know if there's some materials that I haven't referenced yet that ultimately were part of, important to, or relevant to the work you did. But I'm going to move to that, move to some of the things. Were you asked to, in your capacity, review, investigate, and well, let's talk about this. Let me talk about it generally. Were you asked to contemplate the subject of suicide?
Yes, I was asked to testify about my understanding of the science associated with people who choose to end their life by suicide or engage in suicidal behaviors.
Then let's start with that general subject. Can you said choose to end their life or engage in behaviors related to that topic. Can you unpack suicide a little bit from your expert? And by the way, here's one thing I didn't do. Do you read um, uh, and train yourself with studies?
Yes, I review research articles designed to communicate information to professionals and scientists in my world. I don't enjoy doing research. I don't publish research. It's not my preference. However, I stay up to date regularly. In order to maintain my license, I have to complete 48 hours of formal education every 2 years. And every 2 years, I must demonstrate specific education in the field of suicidology, is what we call it in my science.
Suicidology. So, and you, by leaving out the fact that you you use all these materials and stay up, are those peer-reviewed articles and research studies that you're talking about?
Yes, I rely upon empirical articles from peer-reviewed journals.
And I guess I'll ask you, what does peer-reviewed mean?
So it means that a scientist conducts research. He submits or she submits that research paper to a journal, and then there are a group of additional scientists who do not know the author, and they review that author's work for, I don't want to say legitimacy, scientific rigor. How well was it performed? How well was it designed? Did it follow the appropriate standards of practice, et cetera? And then that panel of scientists give information and feedback to the original author, who then gets to review the article and resubmit it. Almost always is the process. It's kind of a checks and balances to ensure the information being published would meet the appropriate scientific rigor to assist individuals who are looking for scientific information.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we'll return now to, you already said you had actually, the training includes the subject you indicated of suicidology. Is there study and training and writing and empirical research on that?
Yes, substantial amounts.
Has it been something that's built, that existed for a long time?
For decades, scientists have looked at the factors associated with life events and decision-making processes and feeling states and other variables that have been associated or linked in a scientific way to individuals who either end their lives by suicide or who attempt to end their lives by suicide or engage in behaviors that we call sometimes parasuicidal or quasi-suicidal behaviors. It's a really big topic in my science, is the short version.
Is it tricky too?
There's a lot of complexity, there's a lot of nuance, there's a lot of details. It's a tremendous amount of science.
So let's talk about people who may end their lives, that aspect of it. Are there a lot of variables and a lot of different circumstances that apply to that end of life desire or that kind of suicide?
Yes.
That might have been a terrible question, so I'm going to let you speak instead of me speaking. But that you said that's about people who actually succeed.
Yes. So the motivations for a person who succeeds or completes the end of their life by suicide.
Is that involves sometimes behaviors that are sudden?
So a really simple dichotomy is we have some individuals who complete suicide after an impulsive decision. A common example is a major life event, a divorce, a loss of a child, a loss of employment, something similar that's a very out of the ordinary, overwhelming experience. And we have other individuals who complete suicide who do so after having contemplated and planned through the process of deciding in advance that they choose to end their lives by suicide.
You had given some examples of the life event related. Is shame part of that subject?
That's one of the variables. If there's an experience where someone's been discovered, something that's been revealed that would be embarrassing, that the person feels overwhelmed, the emotion would be the hypothesis we would generate that they may choose to end their life by suicide.
You mentioned that there are some other suicide-related subjects, and I think you said quasi-suicidal behaviors, parasuicidal behaviors, and we are, of course, going to need you to unpack that.
Sure. So a parasuicidal behavior is something that would be in the realm of a self-harm and may lead to or look like a suicide behavior. This would be, an example would be a superficial cut on one's arm or even one's neck. Oftentimes these behaviors serve the purpose of other than choosing to end one's life intentionally by suicide. Oftentimes these are behaviors where people report that they're seeking a need to be met. Caring, appreciation, kindness, compassion, feedback from others or involvement, a loss of relationship or a fear of people going to not believe me, etc. And so they engage in a behavior that's in the realm of harming oneself. However, it lacks the intent and it lacks the lethality, the means necessary to end one's life. And that's parasuicidal behavior patterns.
So it's in the realm because it presents features, but is not, if I understand you, in fact, a person who's intending to ultimately end their life.
Yes, and that's revealed both with the behavior itself, that is in the nature of the behavior. A specific example is very, very few people end their life by using a knife to open an artery. And when they do, there's a very specific pattern involved. And when people engage in parasuicidal behavior, they often will use a knife to create superficial cuts in a way that is almost impossible to end one's life.
Does that behavior also sometimes include like ingestion of drugs or things like that?
Yes, so especially among females, the research indicates quite clearly that a person may take a substance, a medication of some variety that would create an adverse effect like nausea or dizziness or even potentially loss of consciousness. And in other situations, it can be a non-lethal. I've had people come to me and we've read research articles about people who take an excessive amount of one particular medication that would not result in the loss of life.
I think quasi-suicidal was the next sort of subject on this point.
So this is a step closer, so to speak, toward a behavior that would actually be sufficiently lethal to end one's life. So rather than a superficial cut going the wrong direction, so to speak, this would be a deeper cut requiring stitches going the correct direction. This would be, an example would be a person who, in one research study that I read, and in another personal experience in my practice, would present a set of circumstances in which the appearance of death by hanging was imminent, but would have safeguards in place to ensure discovery of the behavior. So an example might be the individual would create the news, the system already, so to speak, or have the appearance of being ready and standing on a chair 5 minutes before someone's going to come home. And again, the danger here is that individuals engaged in this quasi-suicidal behavior typically are not, well, the research tells us they're not typically motivated to end their lives. They're typically motivated by other variables, but the behavior itself poses a much greater risk of lethality because the method they're using, if not intervened or managed appropriately, could result in the loss of life. Another example would be a person who overdoses on a medication cocktail that would be either sufficiently lethal or very nearly lethal, but does so in the presence of another person. I've had experiences where a person, for example, came into the kitchen and in front of a spouse or another adult living roommate consumes medication with a very high prediction that the other individual intervene and will rescue the person.
So they are presenting much more dangerous and lethal features, but they still, if I understand you, are not actually intending to end their life.
That's what the research tells us, that these individuals who survive these attempts describe experiences. And again, it ranges, but oftentimes it's overwhelming emotions, it's difficult life circumstances, and they're typically seeking a motivation or an outcome other than the loss of their life, the intentional loss of their life.
Would it be fair to say when we're in that quasi category then that their intent is to present the most lethal seeming circumstances to convince the other or others that it's real?
Yes. So the way the science would describe it is these are individuals who are coping with something so powerful that they're resorting to coping strategies that are clearly, from a healthy perspective, dangerous and problematic. However, when people feel that much overwhelmed and their life circumstances can become so painful and powerful, we as humans, we behave in ways that are irrational. We behave in ways that are mostly fueled by our feeling state rather than a logical, analytical process evaluating what is best for us. And so when people have these kinds of life events and these kinds of emotion, and it can be not just an in the moment experience, it can be a cumulative experience, things that have been happening for a very long time, then they tend to engage in ways that are out of the ordinary. We do things when we have big emotions, all of us, that we later look at and think, why did I do that?
You said you've had even some personal experience in your clinical practice of tragic outcome of a quasi-suicidal behavior, unfortunately resulting in an actual death.
Yes.
And I'm not saying that's all you know about the subject, but as an example, one of your patients,
Yes.
just really briefly describe how that, it was an articulation of the things that you've just described in general.
It's happened twice in my career, that particular experience that in one circumstance, it was a person who, the information I had in my role as a clinical psychologist was that my patient expected for an adult to return home at 5 p.m. And she had experienced a wide range of powerful life events and emotions. She had engaged in parasuicidal behavior for a very long time, and had received some unpleasant and painful feedback. People communicated to her that they were frustrated, discouraged, exhausted, tired. There was discussion about the end of the relationships. It was a very difficult time, and she engaged in a behavior that she could have been rescued had the person arrived home at 5, but they were stuck in traffic and were unable to arrive until such time that the result of her behavior was the loss of her life.
Was her behavior, is that the patient who used a hanging behavior?
This was a person in this instance who consumed a range of medications that she had stockpiled.
So she had utilized that method, your opinion as her doctor was, as yet another quasi-suicidal event, but unfortunately she wasn't discovered in time.
That was my opinion as a clinical psychologist offering assistance to the family who survived her. Yes.
I want to move now to a different subject that I have hired you to consult with, and that is behavior patterns of individuals, relationships, and that sort of thing, right?
Yes.
In particular, was I asking you to consult with with us, on this, on, in particular, sort of the personality traits, if you will, behavior patterns of, in particular, let's Meggan Sundwall and Casey Terry.
Yes.
Now, we had already indicated that, was that the bulk of the information you got from the communication, the communications that were documented?
Yeah, the majority of the volume of the communication between Ms. Sundwall and Ms. Terry.
Also, in the materials you got, were you able to learn about, for instance, Meggan Sundwall and other people, because there were interviews with friends, family, and other people associated with them?
Yes.
So were you able to learn as much as you could? Granted, is it fair to say that I don't have infinite resources to pay you to work on this all day?
I would assume that would be the case.
Okay, so as we tried to streamline or narrow the subjects, were you able, do you think you got enough information to have some basic opinions and conclusions about, in particular, the nature of some personality traits and characteristics, let's say, of Casey Terry
Yes.
and Meggan Sundwall?
Yes.
And important, did I ask you to focus as well on the relationship based on the information you had between the two and the nature of this forensic context?
Yes.
Now, we already established you're not a psychiatrist,
I am not.
and I did not ask you to interview Meggan Sundwall, right?
I have not.
And I did not, well, and obviously you've never met Casey Terry.
I have never met Ms. Terry.
And so in fairness, are you relying on the materials and written information and information given to you by the defense to render your opinions and conclusions?
Yes.
Do you feel, though, maybe I already asked this, I'm sorry if I did, do you feel that the material was sufficient to reach some of these opinions and conclusions?
I believe I can formulate opinions based upon the observations of the behavior. It's written communication. In my world, we still think of this as behavior that helps me identify patterns of relating with people, patterns of, we call them personality traits or characteristics that took place over time and across different relationships, yes.
What did you, describe some of the things that you observed in that regard about Casey Terry?
One of the things that stood out was that Ms. Terry's communications very frequently presented what in my science we would think of as crisis cries or crisis communications. Very frequently, the behavior pattern would be kind of common, typical chit-chat communication, and then very, very frequently information of a very substantial nature. Medical events that are really hard, painful to hear. Like, for example, communication of cancer diagnoses or broken bones, or in several instances, modifications or enhancement, so to speak, of a previous diagnosis, involvement with very different patterns of interest depending on the person with whom she was interacting. It was very frequent that with interactions specifically with person A, for example, specifically with Ms. Sundwall, her communication patterns were starkly different from her communication patterns with Ms. Michelle Teamy, among others. And so one of the patterns I observed was Ms. Terry's communications indicated that she presented herself and her interests and her opinions in substantially and markedly different manners to different persons in her life. that very, very frequently Ms. Terry's communications were contradictory between the parties with whom she was communicating, where she would communicate one set of information, again, just as an example to Ms. Sundwall, and an entirely different set of communications to Ms. Kylie Clark, as an example.
And I'm going to introduce the word splitting and then ask you what that means to you or your science.
Yeah, so splitting behavior is a common pattern of behavior where an individual orchestrates and organizes relationships that function to keep two people separate and independent of each other, and almost always at odds with each other. So the record that I reviewed in this case indicated quite clearly, just as one simple example, Ms. Terry communicated repeatedly to Ms. Sundwall that her relationship with her sister, Ms. Clark, was very problematic, was very hurtful, that was very, very caustic. However, she also communicated the exact opposite to Ms. Clark. To Ms. Clark, Ms. Terry communicated repeatedly that Ms. Sundwall was a very devious person, was a very harmful person, that she saw only her own selfish interests. In a simplified version, she sort of put Ms. Clark in one extreme and Ms. Sundwall in the other extreme, and it serves the purpose, this type of behavior typically serves the purpose of preventing these two individuals from interacting. And most often this is a coping strategy we see when people experience symptoms often associated with fear of rejection or abandonment, who experience life events that leave them feeling very vulnerable or very sensitized to emotion. And they develop coping strategies to respond to these life events in ways that work rather well, which is what splitting does. It accomplishes the goal of me getting my needs met from person A and from person B. And many times it serves as a way to kind of hedge my bet that if person A somehow leaves my life, I still have person B, or the reverse.
You abused person A and B, but to go back to some of the names of other people you saw communicate, was this splitting behavior, did it exist with the others or some others?
Yes, I saw the same pattern with the communications with Ms. Michelle Tingey, with Meggan's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Leanne, and I'm so sorry, I forgot Randall, I'm sorry. I saw that behavior pattern as well, and manifesting in those. The communications I reviewed with Mr. Casey, I can't remember his last name, Tanner, I apologize, indicated a similar pattern where many times throughout the communications, and it was years of communications, this pattern was manifest with different people in her life, where one person received one set of information, another person received almost an entirely contrary piece of information.
And again, so this splitting, would be fair to say it's sort of like spokes, but no tire.
Yes, that's a common way we describe it, is if I'm the one doing the splitting, I sit at the hub and I keep everyone their independent spoke away. Again, it's a coping strategy to avoid being hurt by rejection or by people discovering things about me that I find embarrassing or uncomfortable. On the outside, it obviously looks problematic, and it is problematic, but for the person experiencing the symptom, most people engage in this behavior as a way to cope with something they're experiencing that's very painful. Even though its behavior is problematic, that's what we call it a maladaptive coping strategy. It works rather well.
You said, and I get that, so the person in this case, we're talking about Casey Terry, is engaging in this to cope, but is hurting.
I would hypothesize that was her reason. I have to be cautious that I didn't interview Ms. Terry. So the patterns of behavior that she demonstrates are consistent with the patterns we observe in research or in people I've treated. I just want to be very fair.
Right, you're not, fair enough. On the pattern of, and on this feature of this coping strategy, can it be effective for people who are engaged in that behavior?
that's one of the problems with this behavior pattern is in the short term, it's really, really effective. It works rather well, and it facilitates the person having those needs met rather immediately. It can last for a very long time. And that's why it gets used over time and across different relationships. And then another pattern we tend to see with individuals who demonstrate similar patterns is once discovered, they tend to terminate relationships rather quickly. They do a process we often call vilification or idealization. What this looks like is at one moment, this person's the best ever. I can't imagine living without this person. They're amazing. And the next, they're the worst person ever. I want nothing to do with that person. And so we rely very heavily or we pull away very quickly. And this is a similar maladaptive coping strategy that can play into the splitting behavior.
You said that can go on for a long time. I mean, do these people ultimately have to also manage the notion that they'll be discovered?
There's always that, the research tells us that individuals who demonstrate these symptom patterns always describe that experience set. However, most of the time, individuals with similar behavior patterns are so focused on the meeting of one's immediate needs, they have a tremendous amount of difficulty waiting and being patient and considering the long-term ramifications of their behaviors. So they get so focused metaphorically on what's here now in front of me that whatever might come later down the road, it will be dealt with at some point. It's not relevant nearly as much as what's happening now.
And over the course of sort of maintain this coping strategy and this splitting, does the research suggest that sometimes it needs to be energized or sort of increased to maintain the effectiveness?
Very frequently. It's similar, we talked about the moving from a parasuicidal to a quasi-suicidal, that in order to maintain the experience of the relationship and the closeness of the relationship pattern, individuals with these types of symptom patterns will often up the ante, so to speak. They amplify the intensity or frequency or the length of their behavior patterns, because one of the primary factors is reducing the risk of losing a person in their life. Individuals that demonstrate these symptom patterns are often highly sensitive to the experience of someone not supporting them or believing them or caring about them in the way that they desire to be cared or believed in or looked after. And so most of their efforts are geared toward reducing the risk of loss. And so in order to do that, they will often go to great lengths. In this specific case, one of the things I noticed was that in the communications between Ms. Terry and Ms. Sundwall, much of her communication descriptions were associated with adhering to religious tenets and following a faith system devoutly. With her conversations with other individuals, it would be engaged in behavior that would be inconsistent, at least with my understanding of those religious tenets, using substances, seeking out substances, language that would be coarse by its nature and not typically consistent, at least with my understanding of those same religious beliefs. So as an example of using sort of one strategy with Ms. Sundwall, and a very different strategy with individuals who are struggling with substance use behaviors. And that's very typical. Sometimes we call this being the social chameleon, where the individual modify their preferences, opinions, taste, ways of talking or dressing in order to increase their appeal to the person they're currently interacting with.
Now, in order to be, to get this maladaptive need, satisfy this need, do people of this sort need to be effective? Do they need to be believed?
Well, basically, yes, right? Because they're seeking to maintain their relationship at very high cost or with minimum understanding of, or maybe appreciation for the costs associated with seeking to maintain that relationship. In a simple way, they want to be believed and trusted and loved.
Is it then, as the relationships that feed this need in the different ways and get the attention, or do they tend to be being used in connection with people whose personality will also be effective in the relationship structure?
Yes, so part of that social chameleon is these individuals are often very, very effective at reading people, understanding their personalities and their characteristics and traits, and then adapting accordingly. In a really simplified way, if a person who experiences these kinds of symptoms comes across someone who's rather shy and reserved and quiet, it would be really quite common for the person experiencing the symptoms to accommodate. So that would maybe being shy and quiet, or it may be being fun and outgoing, whatever works, whatever serves the purpose of acquiring that relationship and maintaining it. And that's a very common feature set.
Now, let me move to the discussion in particular of what you observed in the relationship that she ultimately built and developed and engaged in with Meggan Sundwall. Did you see? Now you've never, but we already established you've never tried to use an instrument to test Meggan Sundwall's personality, right?
I have not.
You're not here to render some sort of personality characteristics for either of these folks, any of these individuals, right?
No, I'm solely describing the behavior patterns.
In terms of the behavior pattern, did you have conclusions or opinions about whether or not and how Casey Terry was effective in that relationship in meeting her needs?
With Ms. Sundwall?
Yes, with Ms. Sundwall.
Yes, I have an opinion there.
And sort of describe what you saw there and why you thought it would be effective in that regard.
So they observed the behavior patterns and the communications between Ms. Sundwall and Ms. Terry reveal a pattern in which Ms. Terry frequently seeks out and increases the chance of receiving nurturing, caring, compassion, investment, and Ms. Sundwall regularly engages in a similar provision of those things. In an oversimplified way, it can be Ms. Terry seeking out compassion and comfort, and Ms. Sundwall frequently administering that. That's observed in the communication patterns describing sharing of gifts, sharing of time. They refer to each other with terms of endearment on a regular basis. There's clearly instances in which Ms. Terry also generously shares resources with Ms. Sundwall as well. But it's very clearly I don't want to say a patient caregiver or a child parent, but a dynamic in which one person is seeking nurturance and the other person is clearly providing nurturance.
Now, let's just go ahead and focus on that relationship. Are there features that you saw in that relationship that would explain, why do people in Meggan Sundwall's position in that kind of relationship, what do they get? What did they commonly bring to the relationship, and how did they behave?
So individuals who have a high degree of nurturance or caring or patience or gentleness or tenderness often receive intrinsic benefit and reward. So the research would say individuals in my science, mental health, excuse me, in nursing in particular, in palliative care, things of this nature, they often describe experiences of personal reward and value in being part of what helps and supports people. In fact, one common theme in our training in clinical psychology and social work and nursing and so forth is the idea that we take our patient's experience as their experience of reality and truth. And my job as a clinical psychologist is to listen to my patient's story, seek to understand their story from their point of view, and to really basically assume that what they're sharing with me is a reflection of their real life. I'm not an investigator, I'm not a fact finder, and it's quite rewarding to be a part of that relationship of seeing people grow and receiving feedback of being someone who's involved in supporting and assisting and helping. There's a lot of reward for people with those kinds of characteristics that comes from being involved. The other part of the pattern is that individuals who demonstrate symptoms similar to the ones I observed in Ms. Terry are very, very adept at giving that feedback and giving that information. One of the things I always tell my trainees is the moment your patient tells you the best thing ever, and there's never been a smarter therapist in the universe than you, is to really be careful with what we as the therapists do with that information. Because we start to believe that it impairs our capacity to engage in healthcare. That's why they do that behavior patterns, because it rewards us.
Do someone in the position, for instance, we're talking about the relationship that involved Meggan Sundwall, in that dynamic, I mean, what do they do potentially with behavior that might otherwise be contrary to their belief and their personality trait set? To describe that a bit. I mean, how do they act sometimes that might be contrary to what they're otherwise have as a personality and a value set?
So an oversimplified version, I think about when I was dating my spouse and I was giddy in love, so to speak, and she could do nothing wrong. And we've been married for a little while now, and she's an imperfect and wonderful person. But in that state of emotion, my acknowledgement of common, typical human experience was very shaped by my emotional experience. And when individuals are operating mostly by what they're feeling, we as humans don't do a great job of thinking thoroughly and clearly. And what that does with our behavior is it encourages us to not attend very well, not pay attention to, or even to dismiss indicators of, wait a minute, this is not what I normally do. A silly example I use is when my spouse and I were courting, we went to Cold Stone ice cream. We were in college, I had no money, but I bought her a Cold Stone ice cream cone, and we didn't buy another one for probably 20 years because I couldn't afford it. But at that time, I didn't behave according to my financial consciousness self. I was giddy in love. And so it's a metaphor for what most of us humans do.
Now, the ultimate nature of this relationship in this case, including the culmination or the end of it, is quite serious. Do you agree that you saw some quite serious features of this behavior pattern and maladaptive behavior issue?
The number, the frequency, the severity of the behavior patterns that I observed from Ms. Terry's communications would fall within the severe range of a person who demonstrated similar patterns who came to see me.
And on the same seriousness and level, is the length of time that this occurs, how does that affect and generate energy or momentum?
So we call that a cumulative effect. People often, we have an experience that our science calls cognitive dissonance, is one way to explain it. If I've been, simply put, if I've been paying on a car for the last 5 years, it's my dream car, and I really love this car, and I put in so much effort, and I've repaired it repeatedly, I stopped thinking about, it cost me more to keep this car going than the car is worth. I'd be further ahead to simply give the car away than I would be to continue repairing and putting money into this car. And in a relationship, we can do the same thing, any of us. I have tried so hard for so long. I'm so invested, so involved. This is specifically amplified by the number of deception behaviors and the intensity of the deception behaviors that were discovered. That pattern of deception primarily serves the purpose of amplifying emotion. And that emotion investment over time grows exponentially. And it makes it more and more and more difficult for us to accept indicators that would be inconsistent with our conclusions. We explain them away, or we justify them away, instead of being more inquisitive or more scientifically minded. It's a simple way of putting it.
Let me talk a bit, if you could, about how that might reach something that I think may be referred to as a sort of savior complex. Describe that, if that's a thing,
Yeah.
and what it means and how it might apply, of course, for an assessment of this case.
It's a pattern we see in healthcare workers on a pretty regular basis. It's a belief system and a behavior pattern, so to speak, in which a person comes to the conclusion that if I'm the example, I'm the only one who has the capacity, the technical expertise, the willingness, the emotion to take care of my patient. In my world in clinical psychology, some professionals get in trouble, they make errors because they seek to support their patient in a way that is unethical and inappropriate. Like, for example, showing up at their house to dispel an argument between spouses. That's a gross ethical violation. But the goal is, I know so much about you, and I've taken so much care of you, and no one else loves you, and your spouse is horrible because you've told me how horrible your spouse is, that if I don't do this, I'm going to be complicit in your harm. So the idea for individuals who have these kinds of belief systems is they engage in a behavior mostly fueled by the emotional conclusion that I'm here to take care of you and save you, and nobody else can, only me. I'm the only one capable. So not only must I take care of you, but if I fail to take care of you, then unfortunately I'm complicit in your harm. And that's very difficult for someone who's a caregiver.
Now, in this particular case, the subject between these two individuals was less palliative and more Confederate in the actual suicide aspect. Is that correct?
That's my understanding from the communications.
And how would that play? And that seems, talk about counterintuitive. How is it, this relationship and this desire to feel like I'm the only one that can be with you? How can that be consistent with the confederacy of the suicide ideal that Casey Terry, was involved in Casey Terry's constant communications?
So in patterns for other individuals, what people describe is that the purpose of the suicide behavior is a relief. It's the removal of the pain. It's the reduction of their impediment or impairment on other people's lives, that they perceive or describe the purpose of that behavior as a removal as opposed to the presence of a painful event. And so by engaging in the removal of something dreadfully unpleasant, it facilitates the conclusion that I'm doing good. It's a simplified way of saying this.
So that if the idea is that the desire of, in this case, it would be Casey Terry, but someone in the literature that studies in this dynamic, the desire to be free from misery is the savior complex for somebody who's a Confederate or an associate or close one and only that can be part of that subject?
That's one of those that show up. Another is the fulfillment of the loved one's wishes. There have been other studies and other examples where in one study I recall, it was an elderly couple who didn't want to be a burden on, and this is all, of course, research gathering and theory development after the individuals were deceased. They made a pact and wrote a letter to their children where they decided one person to end the other person's life and they're to end their life by suicide. And they talked about it as we're the only ones who can do this for each other. And so we're fulfilling each other's wishes by removing ourselves from this burdensome role we've taken.
So the notion is that this caregiving person is actually in this counterintuitive circumstance that they think that being in their role of assisting and relieving pain is the feature that becomes a savior aspect.
That they become an advocate. They become the one who can rescue. They're fulfilling the wishes of their loved one by adhering to their request or something similar.
And so to bring this kind of full circle to the notion of quasi-suicide, you've described that somebody in the quasi-suicide circumstances is certainly trying to be convincing.
Generally speaking, that's what we would assume, is that they've increased the intensity or the lethality of the behavior that would be closer to an unintentional loss of life by suicide or an unintentional loss of life.
And that the end of the loss of life is the relief that the other person in this codependent relationship is idealizing as the ultimate comfort.
That's often what people report and describe, is that they're seeking to remove the pain or remove the distress by adhering to the person's stated wishes as they understood it.
You had mentioned cognitive bias in some of those terms. Let me turn to another feature in subject, and that is confirmation bias. Can you tell jury a little bit about that and what that means and how it's featured in human behavior?
Yeah, so confirmation bias is something that our science has known about for decades. It happens to all humans to one degree or another. This is a process in which a person comes to a conclusion and they hold to that conclusion dearly. And while holding that conclusion, they actively seek out information to support their belief or conclusion. And at the very same time, they actively avoid gathering information that would contradict their conclusion, or they find ways to discredit other information. The simple way of thinking of this is sort of like having blinders on. I receive and hold on to this data set, and I keep this belief so doggedly tight to me, and anything that would potentially disagree with it, I have to get rid of, I have to explain away, I can't tolerate.
Now, can this it's a human feature, no matter what positions people are.
Yeah, all of us humans do.
All of us do it, is that right? And does that feature play in as you were assessing the relationship between Meggan Sundwall and Casey Terry?
I think there's a very high risk of that happening because it's an internal event. I use behaviors to make inferences about the probability of it happening, and I think there's a high risk that it occurred, yes.
Then, but this can also, let's talk about the medical field. Isn't it, is confirmation bias studied?
Extensively, yes.
For how long?
I believe the first was in 1956 or 8. I'm not positive, but it's been studied extensively. And there are other like associated elements, but that big broad category, medicine is trained on it repeatedly and repletely because unfortunately throughout medical history, a surgeon, a physician can be so convinced she or he has the right diagnosis that they refuse to accept data that would contradict the diagnosis, even if it would promote the better healthcare of their patient. It's so common, in fact, that there's been documented loss of life for decades and decades due to not a lack of technical expertise, but a refusal to reconsider my, so to speak, theory or diagnosis or conclusion.
And it appears to be something that would be problematic, for instance, in science in general, right?
Very much so. There are famous examples. Again, in my science, there was a study once of postmortem brains that was very much replete with this problem that was later thoroughly and exhaustively debunked. Another study involving medication in 2003. There have been tremendous amounts of studies where this has actually shown up and caused overwhelming harm.
Is it correct that these studies have, so the goal is to do it, you can, in science and in medicine, to identify it and minimize it. Is that fair?
Yeah, so an example is in my role, I always keep a decision tree in front of me when I'm doing my evaluation cases, and I always intentionally make an hypothesis, a scientific guess, and I look for information to support that guess, and then I actively look for and ask colleagues about information that would contradict the conclusion I've come to, so that I'm reducing my risk of engaging in that bias, especially when my role involves making recommendations for vulnerable people.
Is it true also in other professions and occupations, or sensitive especially to trying to deal with confirmation bias?
That's my understanding. I knew there was a company at one point that actually had a copyright to show a video of the Challenger disaster, the Challenger shuttle disaster, and trained major corporations to avoid engaging in this confirmation bias and groupthink behavior pattern.
Does that exist in connection with the law enforcement?
That is my understanding. I don't have an expertise in law enforcement psychology, but my understanding is that there are trainings that are designed and promoted to support an understanding of and a reduction of the use or the impact, of confirmation bias.
I would like to turn to another subject, and that could be featured in the present case, especially with regard to how one might react in this particular case, for instance, Meggan Sundwall, to a crisis that they may fear. Describe what the human experience of panic is.
Yeah, so a really simple way of thinking of our brain is that we survive first, and then we feel, and then we think. And when we are confronted with something that causes a lot of unpleasant emotion like panic, that happens at the second stage of our brain, and we tend not to think very thoroughly or effectively. And then our behavior tends to become less organized or productive or less effective. A super simple example, I'm terrified of spiders, and my family laughs at me all the time because if I see a spider, I run and I scream and I act in a way that's really embarrassing to me. And that's a really simple example of when we are faced with something that causes a lot of panic. Most of us have a reaction that's more associated with make that go away, and we don't typically think through a logical analysis of what am I doing, what will happen when I do this, what will the impact be. It's a pretty common human experience.
And can that human experience, is it fueled by emotion?
Yes, very much so. To the point, like, for example, emergency responders, they go through part of their training is to recognize that common human experience of panic or revulsion, and they have to be able to think through the process so that they don't react with that emotion and run away from someone who needs support and help. But there are loads of other examples, but that's a simplified way of saying it.
And if I understand you, then this is a response to a serious threat that the individual is feeling?
Certainly, the more we see something as a threat, then that emotion becomes even more basic, and that emotion can then start to move us toward, I need to survive. An extreme example is if I was on a walk and saw a bear, there's a part of my brain that's going to say, just get out of here, just get safe. It will be accompanied by an enormous amount of emotion, because emotion is designed to motivate our behavior, and it's also designed to tell us what will most likely lead to a successful short-term outcome. Get away from the bear, run like mad. That's what would happen basically.
In a human circumstance, can that be a feature that can last over a period of time?
Especially if it's an unpleasant but not immediately threatening thing. Again, simple examples of pacing back and forth, worrying about, did I make a mistake? I've got to go see my boss tomorrow. What is she going to say to me? What's going to be wrong? I've got to take my exam tomorrow. Oh my goodness, I'm really stressed and worried about that. And I'm not eating, and I'm not really kind to my family, and I'm feeling overwhelmed, and I'm putting things in the garbage can that should have gone to the fridge, and all sorts of things, because our behavior becomes less purposeful and organized the more our emotion builds, and the longer that emotion lasts, the less effectively we tend to think and behave.
Does that, if I understand you, then sometimes relate to panic over a future threat?
Oh, certainly. Yes, because that anxiety about what could happen, again, back to my simple example, what if I fail my exam? I've gone to all this school, it'll all be for nothing. I put my family in an impossible position. My personal experience was pacing back and forth instead of sleeping, which would have been a wiser choice before taking the exam.
And then I take it sort of the further away, but still significant fear of threat. You're in the behavioral portion of your panic reaction because of the future threat, even if the future threat may be days, weeks away.
Yep, get rid of it, make it go away, do what I can to reduce the risk.
And that just went on. We need to come full circle. Again, full circle on this case. In what you did, you had talked about, you had reviewed these communications, and it my mind have been completely clear that communications were reviewed between Casey Terry and a variety of other individuals, including especially, of course, Meggan Sundwall, right?
That's correct.
But you were able to review communications as well between Meggan Sundwall and other people in her life.
Yes, that's also correct.
Thank you.
Welcome.
I have no further questions. Pass the witness.
Thank you. Distinguished Cross.
Yes.
Excuse me. I'm sorry.
Oh, yes. Good morning, Dr. Hancock.
Good morning.
You and I have met before over Zoom. It's nice to
did.
meet you in person.
Nice to meet you too.
Mr. Williams covered much of this with you already, but just to clarify, you obviously never treated Casey. She was dead before you got involved in this case.
That's correct. I've never treated Ms. Terry.
So you never evaluated her clinically.
I have not.
You never administered psychological testing to her.
No, I did not.
You never met with the defendant, Ms. Sundwall.
That's correct. I did not.
Similarly, never gave her psychological testing.
Yes, that's right.
You'd agree that in assessing personality or dynamics of people, it would be ideal to actually meet with the people.
Depends what we're trying to accomplish, but generally speaking, if we're completing a measure of personality functioning, yes, we administer formal measures to describe a comprehensive understanding of the way people see the world, relate with other people and with themselves. And that's typically done in person.
So that would be ideal, but obviously you didn't do that in this case, but you reviewed a lot of communications.
Yes, I was asked to review communications to identify any patterns of behavior.
You didn't review, you were given many of the text messages. You didn't review all of them.
I reviewed the best I could. I certainly didn't review every single one, no.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of them, about 29,000.
Yes, ma'am.
You are a psychologist. You're not a medical doctor.
I am not a medical doctor. I have a PhD. I'm a psychologist.
I want to talk a little bit about Casey. You described in direct that a lot of Casey's communications, particularly to Meggan, were about crisis, medical emergencies. Is that fair?
Yes.
I believe you said that Casey also engaged in modifications or enhancements of diagnoses.
Yes.
Does that mean that she often fabricated or exaggerated, in your opinion, what was happening with her medically?
Yeah, that she would start with like a diagnosis of cancer, for example, and would report later it's now spread or it's now gone from one part of my body to another. So yes, a progression or amplification.
And you're aware that she, in fact, didn't even have cancer.
That's what I read in the record, was that she did not have cancer.
Are you familiar with something called Munchausen's, or I think what now in the DSM-5 is referred to as factitious disorder?
Yes, I am with both.
This is a condition where people fabricate or exaggerate medical ailments, primarily for attention, right?
Primarily for some emotional need, including attention. Yes, that's right.
You mentioned that Casey's communications with people other than Meggan were often very contradictory to what she's telling Meggan, right?
Yes, yes.
I believe you mentioned Michelle and Kylie in particular. Casey did not have a pattern of telling those people these detailed, exaggerated medical stories that she's telling Meggan.
If my memory is correct, she shared medical history with Ms. Teamy and I believe other individuals as well in her communications. My memory is that there was communication that she'd been diagnosed with cancer, that she'd broken a leg. There were some others similar to that's my memory.
Fair enough. So she does talk to them about maybe some medical conditions that, granted, yeah, we all know the cancer is false, so she is lying to them to some degree, but she doesn't have the same pattern of engaging in heavy discussion of exaggerated medical problems with Kylie or Michelle.
I didn't observe that with Kylie as much, and with Michelle less. There were other topics that were discussed more frequently in my review of those records with Michelle.
And she didn't reflect suicidal intent with anybody other than Meggan.
I cannot remember all the details on that. There were so many reviewed. I can't remember if she mentioned it, but certainly it was more commonly discussed with Ms. Sundwall than it was with the others, yes.
And you said that Casey's pattern is consistent with somebody that has a fear of rejection or abandonment.
Yeah, so individuals who demonstrate similar patterns of behavior often have significant fears of rejection or abandonment.
Consistent with Casey seeking attention.
That's also an associated feature set.
And you stated that this is a coping mechanism for people like Casey, people that demonstrate these patterns, that allows them to get their needs met through different people in different ways.
Yes.
You talked about
Yes.
splitting,
Yes.
and that's that concept, right? You're telling person A something, person B something different, because you stand to gain different things from either individual.
Yes, in part.
And you mentioned that a lot of what factors into this pattern is a desire to not lose a certain person in their lives, not lose a source of attention or comfort or care.
That is one of the feature sets, yes.
Would it be fair to say that your review then would be consistent that Casey's pattern is not wanting to lose Meggan in her life?
I would say that the pattern would say she doesn't want to lose the role, the function, or the purpose of having people in her life. One of them being Ms. Sundwall, yes.
You mentioned in direct that, and correct me if I'm misquoting you, you said once discovered, maybe this splitting behavior, someone can engage in villainization, which would include cutting off somebody or, telling other people that they're now an awful person and they don't like them anymore, something like that.
I would say that's not necessarily that order, just that there are two different things there. Once discovered, people will often either go to great lengths to save a relationship and go to great lengths to salvage the relationship the best they can, or they kind of close up doors quickly and powerfully and come to a rather abrupt cessation of the relationship. And then we have this pattern of vilification or idealization. That's somewhat separate. That happens throughout for many individuals who demonstrate patterns of behavior similar to those I observed in the communication pattern from Ms. Terry.
Okay, and that can help keep person A and person B and the splitting behavior separate so they don't communicate and learn the truth of what's happening, I guess.
That can serve that purpose. Yes.
Nothing in what you reviewed indicates, though, that what Casey is telling Meggan, these medical stories, that hasn't been discovered by other people.
I'm not aware of that. Yes, I'm not aware of that.
I want to talk about suicidal ideation versus suicidal completion.
Okay.
People can talk about suicide for years without actually completing suicide, right?
That is correct.
Suicidal ideation can be common in many mental health conditions.
Yes.
Talking about suicide does not mean a person will actually act on it.
No.
Expressing dramatic or fluctuating intent can also be common when somebody's talking about suicide.
That's less common when discussing suicide, but that is one of the features associated with suicidology or suicidal ideation. Yes.
Ambivalence in potentially suicidal people or people who are talking about suicide can be extremely common.
People often demonstrate ambivalence in whether or not they intend to end their life or they're considering it. That happens regularly, yes.
In fact, many potentially suicidal people both talk about wanting to die and wanting to be stopped, or internally they're wanting to be stopped.
Many people who survive suicide attempts or who report having experienced suicidal ideation describe that very process, yes.
You talked a little bit, I think you made reference to someone making a superficial cut on them versus a cut that would actually have a chance of killing them.
Yes.
Is that fair? So correct me if I'm wrong. I've heard of this before too. And I've heard that if you make horizontal cuts on your wrist, that's less likely to medically kill you. Is that
That's
right?
correct, yes, ma'am.
Versus if somebody makes a cut vertical, that might mean that they're more serious.
There's a higher probability of loss of life by suicide if the cut is vertical up the arm than if it's horizontal, yes.
Okay, I wanted to clear that up because you had made reference to that. I wanted to make sure I was understanding that correctly. Have you heard of the term cry for help?
Yes.
What does that mean for you?
Yeah, oftentimes that's a description people use when a person engages in a suicidal behavior or a parasuicidal behavior, and the purpose is to communicate to others, I need your support, I'm hurting, please assist me or take notice of me. It's a desire to have one's needs met, or a communication method, to have one's needs met.
And in fact, that could be, and well, I won't go that far yet, but that could be, I need help, I'm hurting, please stop me from these suicidal, maybe parasuicidal behaviors.
Yes, for some individuals, that cry for help function is please stop or assist me in stopping the pain that I'm experiencing or the distress I'm experiencing. Yep.
Which doesn't necessarily mean please help me accomplish suicide.
Right. That'd be contrary for some individuals.
You would agree that actual suicidal intention and completion would involve decisive, irreversible action.
Successful completion can involve decisive, irreversible action intentionally, or it can be an unintentional, unpredicted outcome.
Okay, fair enough. Some people who talk about suicide or have suicidal ideation may delay suicide.
Yes,
They may never act at all on suicidal ideation.
that's correct. Yes.
Some create excuses about not committing suicide yet.
Yes.
Some seek reassurance.
Yes.
Some test whether others will intervene.
Yes.
These kind of behaviors can indicate uncertainty about whether the person is actually serious about committing to suicide.
Yes, they can.
And like we covered, that those behaviors can indicate a desire to be stopped entirely from committing suicide.
Yes, they can.
We talked about parasuicidal and quasi-suicidal. You, I believe, indicated that some people pretend or engage in behavior that looks like they're suicidal, even though they're actually not. Fair enough?
Yes.
These are often people who are seeking attention.
Seeking one's needs being met is how I would say it. I don't want to be demeaning or pejorative to individuals who are hurting.
Sure, yeah, and I don't mean to be either.
I didn't think you did.
Yes, and sorry about that. You did reference other things. So needs that they might be seeking to be met are care, support, compassion, comfort, those types of things.
Attention, affection, yes.
You'd agree this fits the pattern of Casey.
In part, yes.
Would you agree that Casey was a vulnerable person?
I'm not from a legal standpoint, I'm not qualified for that. From an emotional standpoint, I would say that the behavior patterns demonstrated are very common among individuals who experience a wide range of intense emotion that would increase their risk to being very sensitized to painful emotion and to seeking behaviors to accommodate those emotions that most people sort of in the lay public would think of as probably inappropriate, problematic, probably hurtful.
And some people may take advantage of that kind of person.
Yes, that's an increased risk.
You talked about, so you reviewed a large number of communications between Meggan and Casey. We've covered that. I believe on direct, Mr. Williams asked you that Meggan pretty regularly provided nurturing to Casey.
Yes.
And in fact, she never confronted Casey on these fantastical stories that Casey's telling her.
If she did, I don't remember that happening.
And Casey is telling Meggan, again, you're not a medical doctor, but would you agree that much, if not most, of what Casey is telling Meggan is not even medically realistic?
That would be outside of the scope of my expertise. And so I would be cautious. I don't know.
Okay. Would you agree that vitals that say something like heart rate is 6, temperature is 53, those are not consistent with life?
As a lay person, that sounds very odd to me. Again, I don't have a technical expertise, but that would strike me as rather odd.
Fair enough. A person, you said as a lay person, you're not medically trained. That would strike you as odd. You're aware that Meggan is medically trained?
I am.
She is a nurse, or
Yes.
was a nurse at the time.
Yes.
We talked about what a person in this dynamic, and obviously we're talking about Meggan and Casey specifically. So a person in Meggan's position here, you said they often like to nurture. What they're getting out of this dynamic is they like to nurture. It can be rewarding to feel like they're assisting and helping. You mentioned a savior complex. They may engage in even unethical behavior because they believe they're the only one capable of helping this person, right?
That's what the research tells us, yes.
And you said that they do not want to be complicit in harming the person that in the other person in the dynamic, excuse me.
Yes, the research tells us individuals report that that's one of their motivations.
And Mr. Williams followed up with this with you that harm in a context could mean a desire to be free from misery.
I think I understood that correctly.
Sorry, that was a bad question.
May I ask?
Someone in Meggan's position is doing their best to not harm Casey, but harm might be considered her remaining in a miserable condition in life.
Yes, that's what's described to us, yes.
You mentioned that in a dynamic similar to Meggan and Casey, that it would be important for Casey to need to be believed, right?
Yes.
And we covered, certainly you would agree that the things that Casey's regularly telling Meggan are pretty fantastical.
They're extreme by their nature.
Again, you're not a medical doctor, but we talked about some vitals that, and certainly you reviewed in the text messages, vitals that don't seem to be consistent with life.
Again, as a lay person, that would strike me as out of the ordinary, yes.
Casey talked to Meggan about having this surgery that was facilitated by doctors that would allow her to metabolize medication better so that she could come back and be able to kill herself.
I remember that in the text messages, yes.
Although you're not a medical doctor, are you familiar with any such surgery? That doesn't exist, right?
That's again outside of my technical expertise. As an expert, I don't have an opinion to offer.
you certainly wouldn't expect a medical doctor to facilitate a surgery that's going to allow a patient to commit suicide.
I would be shocked if that were the case. That's again outside of my technical expertise.
And these kinds of communications between Meggan and Casey happened over years.
Yes, the ones I reviewed, yes.
You mentioned a few times, and fair enough, you're, again, a layperson, you don't perhaps have the medical training that you may be able to say more definitively whether these things are possible, whether these vitals are compatible with life, right?
Right.
Again, Ms. Sundwall's a nurse, so she would be in a better position, medically speaking, to know that this information is not factual,
I would assume so, yes.
not consistent with medical knowledge.
Again, I'm just making assumptions that I don't have that technical expertise.
But somebody that does have that expertise would be in a better position to determine whether these things are real.
I would assume so, yes.
In your review of the communications, did you ever see Meggan refer Casey to a therapist or a mental health professional?
I remember them talking about therapy and talking to a therapist. I don't have memory of a referral generated or go see, person A or B.
Did you ever see Meggan dissuade or try to talk Casey out of these suicide attempts or talk of suicide?
Yes.
Explain that.
Yeah, questions like, is this what you want? What's important to you? With oftentimes the YOU would being capitalized. Questions about what's important to you showed up on a regular basis as well.
Did she ever say anything like, please don't commit suicide?
If she did, I don't remember seeing that specifically.
Please, let's get some different kind of help for you.
I don't recall seeing that specifically either.
You mentioned that Casey was actually quite generous with Meggan. You mentioned a couple times that she gave her money, that she took her on trips, gave gifts.
That's what's communicated in the text records, yes.
So when we're talking about, again, in this dynamic, somebody in Meggan's position, we already covered that they can be motivated by this position of being able to offer somebody nurturing or care or affection, right?
Yes.
But certainly people in Meggan's positions could be motivated by something other than that.
Absolutely.
They might stand to gain gifts or money.
Yes, absolutely.
You talked about panic, and this puts someone in a situation where they're less likely to think through their actions.
Generally speaking, yes.
Less likely to be, I think you said, organized or purposeful.
Yes.
Or take deliberate thought through steps.
Yes.
Again, I'm sorry, I keep asking you things. I'm aware, and it's been made evident that you're not a medical doctor. Are you familiar with the process of testing blood sugar with a glucometer?
Only as a lay person observing my grandfather doing it. That's the extent of my knowledge.
I guess describe what your knowledge is of that process.
When I was a young person, my grandfather had diabetes and he would prick his finger. That's what I remember about it.
And there are a number of steps with that, right? You have to prick your finger, put it on a strip, put it in a meter to read the sugar in the blood.
That sounds familiar. Yeah, I remember him doing something with a little square white thing, and he'd have a blood spot in his finger and put a piece of paper on it. Yeah.
Fair to say that that's a multi-process, deliberate event?
That's my understanding, is it takes several steps, yes.
You agree that it's exclusively the jury's job. You've testified, it's been made clear that you testified in many court cases. You'd agree that it's exclusively the jury's job and not yours to conclude whether this was a legitimate suicidal attempt? Absolutely,
yes. I have no opinion to offer on that.
And it's not your job to say whether it was something different like murder?
Absolutely, yes. I have no opinion to offer on that.
That's completely up to the jury.
Entirely out of my hands and entirely these folks' decision.
If I could show the witness what's already been admitted as State's Exhibit 137. Sorry, it'll pop up on your screen and it takes a few flickers and probably maybe even a few more since it's the first time we're using it this morning. Let me know when you see that.
I do see it. Well, I see something on my screen. I'm assuming that's what we're looking at.
Take a look at that, and I know that you reviewed a voluminous amount of text in this case, but tell me if that's one that you recognize having reviewed.
It is, yes.
If we could, oh, that's been published, thank you. What date does this happen on?
8/12/2024,
And what time?
9:45 a.m.
And then the second one,
8/12/2024,
what time?
9:47 a.m.
Are you aware of the date that the events that we're talking about here happened on that led to Ms. Terry's death?
Yes,
Is August 12th.
that's my understanding, is August 12th, 2024, yes.
And this last text says, do you want to take some promethazine when I get there so that you are asleep when this is happening?
Yes, I see that.
This is something that you reviewed.
It is.
I don't have anything further.
Redirect.
There you go, Judge. Just a couple subjects that we just talked on this panic response in this nation, what people do in reaction to a threat. Is that right?
Yes, commonly, and other things too, but yes.
And I think you described it as it's driven by emotion and not necessarily cognitive rational thought.
Yes, that's accurate.
And I just want to address this notion of an organized or intentional activity in relation to this panic response. It doesn't mean that they might not be able to do tasks in relation to their panic.
Right, people are still doing things when they feel panic most of the time. I mean, I guess it's theoretically possible for a person to say, I felt frozen, didn't move.
Sure.
But certainly possible to do things while feeling the feeling of panic, yes.
So they may be irrational, but they're able to be organized enough to function. Is that fair to say?
Sure.
Okay. And it's all, however, driven towards and about the emotional impact and the threat that they're trying to address.
In that moment, yes, generally speaking.
And then since it's emotional and not necessarily rational and such, I mean, isn't it true they can ultimately suffer a worse result from a threat or be foolish and ineffective in addressing a threat?
Oh, yes.
On this question, repeatedly, Meggan Sundwall is addressing through these years at times, addressing to Casey repeatedly, is this something you want, right?
I reviewed that in the text communications, yes.
Is this is suicide, to relieve herself of misery by suicide, right?
That's the conclusion I came to when I read the communications.
So the please save me message from Casey is by letting me commit suicide.
Objection calls for speculation.
Well, the subject is suicide. Is that rephrased appropriately?
It's still speculation, the way the question is phrased, though. Let's try and ask it a different way.
The point is the save me that you saw constantly in response to the question of what you want from Meggan to Casey was written by Casey, I want to commit suicide.
Yes, I observed Casey making the statements that indicated she wanted to end her life by suicide.
And all very frequently that in terms of helping her satisfy that need, she even said often with you present, you Meggan.
I observed that also in the text communications.
Thank you.
Just one. In your review of the communications, Casey is not necessarily inconsistent with what you described as parasuicidal or even quasi-suicidal individuals.
In her communication, she described many patterns of behavior that are commonly found among individuals who engage in that behavior. And she described having engaged in those very behaviors herself.
And again, those parasuicidal and quasi-suicidal is where some people pretend or even maybe even take steps to look like suicide, but they don't intend it.
Yes, that can be involved engaging in behaviors that are associated with suicidal behavior or gesture without intending or without completion of the suicide event itself.
And you mentioned that often they're seeking to get some need met, care, support, compassion, comfort, attention.
That's often some of the motivating factors for that behavior pattern, yes.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Anything else, Mr. Williams?
No, thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. Can this witness step down?
It's my request.
Yes.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You're gonna step down. Counsel, please approach. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we're going to take a morning break. Before you take your break, you are admonished by the court that it is your duty not to converse among yourselves or to converse with any person on any subject of the trial, and it is your duty not to form or
Seated.
We'll go back on the record on case 251-401-132, State of Utah versus Sundwall. Mr. Williams.
Your Honor, the defense calls Chris Bertram.
Thank you. Please come forward, sir. We'll get you sworn in up here.
You do solemnly swear the testimony you shall give in the case now before the court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes.
Thank you.
Come on up and have a seat. Appreciate you being here. If you can keep that mic in front of you at all times, it'll help a lot. Counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. As is necessary with any witness, Mr. Bertram, would you please state your name and then spell it for the
You
record?
bet. Chris Bertram, CHRISBERTRAM.
Mr. Bertram, what do you do presently for a living?
So presently, I own a private investigation company, Bertram and Associates, that my dad started in 1989 when he retired from the FBI. I took that over full-time in 2015, and I work as a consultant and an expert.
When you say a consultant and an expert, on what subject?
I consult on law enforcement related matters, law enforcement investigations, DRAM shop, which is the Utah alcohol liability. I have a company that I'm an expert with regards to Utah liability in DRAM shop when you serve alcohol on premise, law enforcement operations, security, and safety with regards to companies or people.
You say law enforcement investigations and such. How do you, we're going now to go back
Okay.
and to how you got to where you are, what kind of experience you had, what kind of education to get to the point that you consult on that subject.
Right. From an education standpoint, I have a bachelor's in psychology. I have 2 master's degrees, an MBA and a Master of Arts. The Master of Arts is from the Naval Postgraduate School in California, where I graduated with a master's in Homeland Defense. Law enforcement wise, in 1990, I started with the Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office as a reserve deputy while I was still in college. That following year, I was hired full-time as a deputy and went to work for the Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office in a patrol function on our East Patrol. A year later, I was transferred to juvenile detectives, spent 3 years in juvenile detectives, went to our court unit for a year, and then back to our detective division. At the time, we had 2 detectives. We had detectives and juvenile detectives. I went to detectives. I worked a year and a half there as a detective and then got promoted to sergeant after 6.5 years. Went to back to juvenile detectives for a year. That switched a year. A year later, I went to our Special Investigations Detective Division as a sergeant for a year and a half. Back to patrol for about a year and a half, promoted to lieutenant. And I spent the next 6 years as a lieutenant, our East Patrol Division, our West Patrol Division, our Watch Command Division, and then back to investigations as a lieutenant over our intelligence, homeland security, federal task forces, fugitives, major investigations, narcotics. Promoted to captain, went to the city of Holiday, and at the time, the sheriff's office had contracts with several cities, and I served as their chief of police until I retired. We became the Unified Police Department during that time, and I was promoted to deputy chief and retired in 2015. During that time, I also attended the FBI National Academy and graduated from there, Quantico, Virginia, the FBI Command College, the Post Command College, continued on with educational endeavors throughout my career. Retired in 2015, so almost 11 years ago.
And though you retired, you say you stayed in the industry.
Yes, I did.
Now, obviously not as a cop, right?
Not as a police officer.
Do you do investigations?
I do as part of my company. Yes.
And then you mentioned consultation.
Yes.
Is what sorts, who seeks consultation from you? What kind of people or entities or
Yeah,
businesses?
Mostly, I mean, attorneys are my biggest people that consult with me. I also consult with, local law enforcement. It could be local, counties. I do consultation, larger business and corporations. Bertram and Associates, my father had connections throughout, retired FBI agents throughout the country. And so we get contacted by, companies that may have businesses or need consulting done here in Utah, along with counties and cities. I consult with them, attorneys a lot of time, and then very few, but occasionally with citizens if they have something that I can help with.
And then have you testified as an expert witness on the subject of police investigations and
Yes.
police investigations?
I have.
Now, you indicated with attorneys, you're not a police officer. Is it fair to say that the attorneys that are consulting with you are in private practices or in, frankly, the defense work?
Yeah, most of. Occasionally there's with a city or a district that I'm doing work for, consulting with, there may be attorneys involved with those, but the majority are private attorneys.
So considering that the government has police, you are more likely to be the consultation source for defense attorneys in the criminal justice.
Most of the time, majority of the time.
And you've testified as an expert, roughly how many times do you think?
I've testified, I think, as an expert 23 times. I've done some depositions, and then the other cases that I was an expert on haven't come to testifying yet or were resolved prior to my testimony in court.
I'm gonna go ahead and assume that in all the things that you just described in terms of your expertise and your history with policing, it's involved all sorts of kinds of investigations.
Yes.
In other words, fraud, person crimes, sexual abuse offenses, things like that. Is that fair?
That's a true statement.
Now, were you involved in homicide investigations?
So I was never a homicide detective with the sheriff's office. However, I worked detective jobs that supported the homicides. And so when we had a homicide, there would be times when it was all hands on deck, or there were specific, units that would come out and help. And so on numerous occasions, both as a detective, a sergeant, even lieutenant and captain, we would support our homicide investigations. Since I've retired, quite a few homicide investigations, from the defense side mostly.
In other words, reviewing and testifying in relation to police activity in homicides, consulting and testifying on that subject.
Consulting and also as a defense investigator, but consulting and testifying as an expert.
And let me just be careful there. So sometimes you're hired to do investigative work, right?
Yes.
And we'll get to it, but you weren't necessarily hired in this case by me to do investigative work.
No, you have a defense investigator. So no.
You pointed, is that Marissa?
I'm sorry.
said?
Yeah, Marissa is your defense investigator, and so you had one. So that was not my role here.
So I wasn't someone who sent you off on task to try to investigate or react to some of the features of the state's investigation.
Not in this matter.
In terms of what I hired you and asked you to do was consult on what happened in the way of an investigation in this particular case, right?
Yes.
Where you provided materials to help in that task.
Yes.
We just learned, ironically, from a psychologist, but there's a term discovery. You understand that to be the materials that the government is required to provide that relate to their investigation.
Yes.
Police reports.
Yes.
Did you see, for instance, there's a 444-page police report in this case.
Yes.
Were you able to review text message communications evidence as well?
So within that report that involved, there were some text messages I looked at, but the majority of which I did not review.
And is that when you work for the defense a defense attorney, me, is it fair to say that I would kind of direct what I'd like you to look at in order to get you prepared for consulting?
For as an investigator or as an expert?
Well, in
Both.
this case, it was an expert, but
Right.
the point is who has the resources and has to figure out how to use those when you work for defense attorneys?
There is a budget. And so within that budget, I have to work within what they have. And so it's, there are times, there are limits to the budget.
And did I ask you to focus primarily on the discovery that had to do with the investigative activity of the case?
Yes.
And didn't I actually say not to focus on, to be familiar with, but not to focus on the text communication data that was voluminous?
Yes.
So then again, on those materials, were you able to review police interviews that were done?
Yes.
Able to review the report and carefully pay attention to this activity, the investigative activity by the police entities?
Yes, I was.
And in this particular case, that included investigators or special agents now for the Utah County Attorney's Office.
Yes.
And then C, forensic evidence, how it was collected, how it was prepared, and how it was utilized.
Yes.
Interviews, if I didn't already get to that, by police.
Yes.
Whether or not, to what extent tools such as subpoenas or search warrants were utilized.
Yes.
Scene preservation, reports in relation to scene preservation,
Yes.
and, for instance, evidence preservation.
Yes.
And the reason I'm identifying those is I don't want to go through every single thing that a police officer does in an investigation in general. I'd like to hit on the topics, and I'm going to choose topics that would apparently relate to this particular case in the
Yes.
interest of being surgical. All right, let's talk about, and some of this may just seem obvious when I introduce it, but I'd like you to elaborate a little bit on it since you're an expert. Let's talk about the principle of how to address the timing and nature of getting to a scene of investigative interest. And I say that now because one might not know in police work, right, that they're involved with a crime scene at first. Is that fair?
Yeah. You respond out to the initial call, the initial response.
Do you, when police respond to the initial call, if you will, to do police work, can you describe the extent to which it matters whether or not at that time you know whether it will result in a criminal investigation?
Well, I mean, when you respond out to a scene, a lot of times you don't know what you don't know, or there are things that there may be a lack of information, or there may be information that is misleading. And so you don't necessarily know. And that's one of the reasons that when you get to a scene, we follow protocols and practices to make sure that the scene is, secure. People, lives are taken care of first. But then once those things, life-saving things are taken care of, then it becomes important to, secure the scene, because we don't know what's going to be important later. And so whatever it is that's there now or not there, we need to make sure that we preserve.
When the police are conducting that sort of aspect of a case, is the timing of getting to the scene to preserve it important?
Very important.
And why? Maybe this is obvious, but
I use this statement throughout my career, and especially, even in the private investigative world, my consulting world, time matters. Minutes count. And so one of the things that, within law enforcement, we want to get to a scene as quickly as possible. Now, if this is somebody, broke my window, it may not be as urgent as somebody is having a medical crisis, and that there may be other things involved, or somebody has just been seriously injured and suspects are still on the scene. We want to get to a scene as quickly as possible so that we can, one, make sure that people are safe, and then two, make sure that we preserve and start collecting and investigating as law enforcement officers. You get a first time first.
Is it important to also sort of try to keep as broad a perspective in what the scene is as possible?
Absolutely.
And explain that a bit.
Well, it's you may walk into a scene where you see something that's occurred in a 5x5 space. The truth is that's not just only your scene. You may have a bigger scene. You may have multiple scenes. You have to keep that perspective when you come in there that what you're seeing in front of you is not it. It's bigger. And you've got to make sure that as you start your investigation, if that scene needs to widen, if that scene needs to go to different places, you need to be able to make sure that you're securing all of that. Again, that first time first, we may be looking here, but within 10 minutes because of chaotic scene, or within 30 minutes, we realize the scene is a lot bigger. You need to make sure that we amply go out to where that scene may actually be. And if there are multiple scenes, make sure that we're securing those to make sure that we're collecting what evidence is there, what evidence is not there.
Let's talk about, you say collecting, and I want to sort of deal with that concept also in terms of searching. Because we hear the word searching sometimes. You said collecting. Is it best police practices to have a very broad perspective on searching what you can and collecting what might be evidence?
Right. And when I say collecting, I'm probably, being a little narrow in what I'm saying. We presume that we're going to search and we're going to secure the scene before we go and collect potential evidence. But yeah, you're identifying where you're going to want to look for items that may be of importance to your investigation.
Of course, in some cases, you'll have to have access, for instance, to an area or to a device or something like that, right?
Yes.
Are sometimes legal principles involved in whether or not and how you can do searching and when?
Absolutely.
I want to just narrow right down to it. When you're trying to keep the broadest scene and preserve the broadest circumstance, and protect that circumstance, if it involves things that people have rights to, are you able to speak to them about their willingness to allow you to do it?
Yes.
And sort of explain that. I mean, if somebody is present and your police are, with your experience too, and the police are wanting to do something, regardless of the rights that they have, as your understanding, do you ask them whether or not they would agree to let you do things?
That's absolutely the first thing that you're going to ask. It's, why make it more complicated? If I can simply, if there's a device or an area that I want to search, it's always the ask. The first thing that you want to do is, hey, do you mind if I take a look at this? Or do you mind if I make a copy of this? Or do you mind if I have access to this area? Ask.
In this particular case, in terms of responding to addressing scene security and searching and collecting, did you have some concerns?
Yes.
Describe some.
Well, obviously, this is somewhat of a chaotic scene at the beginning. There's life-saving, there are life-saving elements that are going on. There are medical people in there, EMS people in there. They're not always concerned about crime scene security or making sure. So they're doing their job. But at the same time, you have, police officers are responding, and they have to start thinking about, as these life-saving measures are going on, we need to make sure that we're securing the scene as best we can, because once EMS is done, you then have, a potential investigation, you have a scene that you want to secure. You want to make sure that whatever was, maybe moved or taken, we've documented as best we can, because like I said, I love my firefighters and paramedics, but they'll make a mess of my scene, doing the job that they need to do. As best I can, try to manage that while they're in there. Once they're out, it's my scene. Law enforcement now has, we've got it. And I want to make sure that I'm making sure that everything that I think that might be important, I'm securing. And again, developing out from there as I talk to people and get access to things, there may be more areas that I want to secure and make sure that we don't tamper with, and that we, can collect items and evidence that may be important later.
And by the way, if you've seen body camera and things like that, wasn't it immediately discussion by the police on scene of potential drug distribution crimes?
Yes.
Overdose was obviously the call-in on this case, right?
Yes.
But while the police are still there, they're learning information of this, that it could be suspicious,
Yes.
could involve crimes in relation to the condition that the person who was taken by EMTs could be part of.
Yes.
The police officers that are involved, describe real quick the difference. There's patrol officers, right?
Patrol officers are typically, again, depending on the agency, are going to be your first people that are going to be there. They're the uniformed officers. They respond when there's a call. They're the ones that are the first responders. And your initial calls are going to be, one, they're going to respond, and two, they're going to be the initial investigators.
Then, is it then assigned to another case agent?
But in most police departments, and again, different sizes have different, protocols, but at some point, if we believe that there's going to be more than just an initial investigation that is needed, that more than what just a patrol officer is going to do, an investigator or detective is assigned to the case.
In good policing, while the police are there, but also when a detective is assigned, standard best practices, is the timing of getting to that scene important?
Yeah, absolutely. If you believe that there is, and again, sometimes we don't know what we don't know, and we have to presume something that might be important later. We've got to recognize that getting it now is important. Detectives, in most cases, will have that broader view of how an investigation should be conducted. What's going to be important? How soon should we collect it? In what manner should we collect it? All those things can be determined, and we would expect that the detective who may have the responsibility of doing this investigation and taking that through all the way to the end is going to know what's important, going to make sure that that's done correctly.
In this particular case, did you have concerns about best practices in that regard?
Yes.
Explain.
Starting from even the patrol officers that are on scene, they're getting information. This is not an unknown. They're getting information that there was a medical issue. There is the possibility that there are, there may be other substances that are used. This may involve, some type of drug. We want to make sure that once EMS is left, that we're going to secure that and make sure that the things that need to be done are collected in the proper manner, that we don't destroy something, we don't miss something. We want to make sure that we're going to do a thorough search. At the same time, gathering as much information as you can. And you see that with the officers are looking around the room, they're moving things, again, not always best practice, but they're moving things, they're looking at things without necessarily photographing it in place before we actually get into what it is. But they're discovering, as they look at things, they're discovering things that are very concerning from a law enforcement investigative standpoint. They're finding things that don't always, that may make sense, but may not make sense. It's a situation where the more that they look, there are things that are significant to this investigation.
Let me talk about just one such thing. I don't want to belabor every point of this, but let me start here. As it goes on, do you think that the best practices in policing work, it would become obvious that the scope of the area to be searched, looked at, in consideration was far greater potentially than just one room?
Yes.
You didn't see them ever treat more than just that room as the scene to be investigated?
No.
That includes.
And let's just be that evening, that right at the initial response. Yes.
Well, let's go to ever. Did you see anyone in this investigation ever expand the investigative scope, purposefully expand and preserve, other than that room?
No.
Including the bathroom that's right next to it.
Bathroom, kitchen, common areas, absolutely. Entrances, exits, things that are very important to an investigation. need to be, one, preserved, and then two, need to be properly investigated.
And then you mentioned documenting things. Photographs is an obvious way you document things, right?
Yes.
Photographing the area that you are treating as the scene, right?
Right.
Now, you saw one officer take some photographs on a cell phone before he left. That was Osborne, right?
Right.
Ultimately, a couple days later, this scene, this room is searched pursuant to a warrant. Remember that?
Yes.
I think it was the 14th, a couple days later.
I think 14th or 15th.
And during that occasion, you were able to observe at least how that occurred through the body cam of Detective Farney.
Yes.
Just to be thorough, and the body cam that you were able to observe is the body cam that we manipulated that was upside down, but we turned it so you were able to have that version when you observed it.
Yes.
In your understanding, is there a single photograph that comes from that search
From the search warrant,
on the 14th?
I didn't see any photographs done.
We'll get to it in a minute, but there was also this ultimate addressing of the area outside on the patio with the trash search and the Fanta box, we're going to call it. You recall that?
I do.
You were able to observe that. You don't know, probably, that some footage was played from that day. That was the 19th. Did you see law enforcement take any photographs of that search?
No.
Ultimately, is it your opinion that the failure to secure the scene impacted the quality and ability to have a quality investigation as it pertains to this case?
Yes, it does.
In how? What did we learn later that showed that the way this scene was treated, let's just, this room and this house, how it impacted the quality of the outcome?
Again, the scene is mishandled. It's mishandled at the beginning. It's mishandled as the investigation moves forward with regards to what is potentially, evidence and how we collect it. The scene's tainted. The scene gets, I use the word adulterated, meaning people come in, they move things around. There's not explanations that are gained as to what was taken, what was removed. When we look at a crime scene, a lot of times we'll think about what is there that's important, but it's also what's not there. And when you look at what's there and what's not there, after that initial police, the uniformed police officers there are people that move in and out of that space regularly. There's, an unfortunate, weather-related accident that occurs. There are things that, again, when I say that you get your first time first, it's very important you take advantage of it, because after that, we don't know what happens in that crime scene if you're not there. And that is just it's an imperative to say, if you get that opportunity, take it. Good and best practices are that we investigate these, with an expectation that it's going to be good, that there's going to be an exceptional investigation. Whether it's a minor offense or potentially a major offense, that's what you deserve. I mean, I expect that as a law enforcement person, as a law enforcement executive. I expected that you want an exceptional investigation done. And if you go ahead, if you don't, go ahead.
Let's go to some particulars. Can you think of any reason that the bathroom wouldn't have been searched, wouldn't have been preserved, let alone searched on the night that police first arrived?
I mean, I'll say that no, there's no explanation, but I also know that, there's things like laziness or, not having the capacity to be an investigator or not understanding the importance of an investigation. There's a lot of reasons why you may not think it's important at the time. Again, some of the things that I've experienced throughout, 36 years are there, but no, it needs to be looked at.
Well, in this particular, to make a point out of your generality, in this particular case, it was in an interview with Meggan Sundwall that occurred days later that the potential use of the bathroom became a major feature. Do you agree?
Yes.
So does that illustrate the point that by failing to do the work there, you fail to be able to preserve things to assess that bathroom in relation to the issues that came up later in the case?
Yes.
We'll talk about another specific part. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but in the initial police work and the cameras, did you recall that it was captured on another officer's camera that Officer Robinson had found a letter that he was holding up that had Meggan Sundwall's name on it, right?
An envelope.
An envelope.
Yes.
I'm sorry. He had found an envelope. He had held up the envelope and looked in it according to what we can tell from the camera, right?
Yes.
And had actually asked Jorgensen, who was in charge, do you want me to run? This has a name on it. Do you want me to run this name?
I do recall that.
Now, that's Meggan Sundwall, and what he meant by run was seek out information from the various sources.
I presume so.
You later, was it obvious that it was later learned from an interview with Mark Kay and Kylie that material that they had been communicated to by now deceased Casey to not give certain things?
Judge, I'm going to object. This is leading the witness.
I'm just getting to the next act. It's transitional.
Overruled. I'll allow it. We gotta get there.
I'm just talking about, you saw later there's an interview that would have to do with materials to give to Meggan. Is that fair?
Yes.
I'm just asking this as illustrative. And then ultimately did you learn that it appears that those individuals or some individuals of some sort had been in the room?
Objection again, Judge, this is leading. If he wants to ask the witness what he learned, then the witness can explain that himself.
That's fine. What did you learn about the significance of that interaction with the letter, with the envelope?
That it appears that things were removed by individuals that later in the police investigation, those items may not have been available.
Let's just talk about the Fanta box. This Fanta box thing, what did you see about the evidence in the Fanta box and its discovery?
So there was, from the investigation, there was a mention about there was items found in a Fanta box, including a rag, some other items that were syringes. With regards to, there was the officers came back to the scene. However, it appeared that a family member, Mark, had actually handled those things, taken them out, taken photographs of them for the detectives, and then kept some of those things out, but then thrown the Fanta box back in the garbage.
Let's just talk about how that originates. I mean, it's the 19th, it's 6 days after the event. And how did the police learn that potential evidence was on scene?
They were told by Mark, because they were out at the residence again, and they were told by Mark that there may be potential evidence.
And did you see how Mark told, actually the 18th, did Mark communicate with Detective Farney?
Yes,
Did Mark communicate about having found that evidence?
he did.
Do you take issue with how Detective Farney, in terms of best practices, reacted to that?
Yes.
Describe.
When as an investigator, if you're made aware of something like that, that is, and again, it gives me, a little cringe anxiety that you don't touch that. If somebody calls and says, hey, I found something at the scene, we're actively investigating, don't touch. We'll be out. And if I'm not available to come out as an investigator, I'm gonna have somebody else come out and photograph that in place, collect it, find out the circumstances of how that was found, what was done. And again, important by the fact that, did you touch it? Did you remove it? What did you touch? We have to have an understanding so that as we process that as potential evidence, I maybe know that, I handled it a little too much, or I touched this one. Do your best not to. Allow law enforcement to come out and properly collect that so that it's going to be effective if we need it.
Did that happen?
No.
In terms of resources, real quick, some departments are smaller than others.
Yes.
Did you in your career encounter, and in your career since being a police officer, the system of agency assist or utilizing entities such as crime scene investigation,
Yes.
was that available generally in the departments that you have looked at and are aware of?
Yeah, in 36 years, smaller, medium-sized departments utilize a lot of times mutual aid, which are other departments that may have resources, state agencies that may have resources that they don't have.
The police officers get trained about the importance of managing potential evidence.
Yes.
What about the issue of mismanaging it and the effect of contaminating its ability to be forensically analyzed?
I mean, you have training, and through your training experience, I would hope that, training, you're definitely going to know that if you mismanage things or you don't collect or you contaminate those, they have significant effects down the line with your cases.
Do you believe that mishandling in training, part of it is mishandling evidence, whether the police officer does it or someone else does it, can impair the ability to get things like fingerprints?
Yes.
Can impair the ability to get things like DNA.
Yes.
Now, when you're working as a police officer, you don't know what the DNA or the fingerprints or anything might mean, right?
Nope.
They could incriminate somebody.
Yes.
They could exculpate somebody.
Yes. Absolutely.
As a police officer, are you trying to make those decisions as to where this evidence is going to flow?
Well, you want to collect it in such a way that no matter which way it flows, that we preserve it. We haven't contaminated it. We haven't tainted it. Haven't lost it or misplaced it or decided not to collect it and think, man, I should go back 6 months from now and see if that's still there. That's not a good feeling. Six hours after going back is not a good feeling. It shouldn't be a good feeling.
In this particular case, we've got, it was almost immediate. We already discussed that it's a potential overdose, and then insulin could be involved. You saw syringes that were part of the evidence in the case, right?
Yes.
We saw a syringe that was in the room and put on a nightstand, right?
Yes.
Then there was a syringe found in the Fanta box 6 days later.
Yes.
You remember in the in-between time, there's a syringe found by Mark and turned over to the Farney and Hales when they were there on the 19th.
It was found in the bedroom.
Found in the bedroom.
Yes.
Now, by the way, at that point, do you have an opinion as to whether or not you can fairly say where that syringe, with all the activity that occurred in that room, where that syringe was originally?
When Mark found the syringe?
Well, Mark, where he found it versus where it could have been originally.
No, that room had been, from a law enforcement standpoint, tossed. There had been people that had been in there. Things had been moved. Plus, there was mitigation going on from the weather-related, damage that occurred in the room.
We'll talk about witness interviews real quick. Was there a witness interview circumstance that occurred in this case that gave you concern?
Yes.
Describe that.
When they initially went out, the detective went out and talked to the family. I mean, and again, this is the follow-up for the detective talking to the family. Sometimes if you're going to talk in general, all the family members being there, but having a good developed interview with these individuals should be done, separate from them. Shouldn't be done in front of everybody. That is, potentially, again, contaminating or making suggestibility for people that may not remember something. You're, giving them the idea that, you may be even planning something in their memory. You want to make sure that these interviews are separate and that they're done, distinctly so that, nobody's standing 10 feet away and listening to what the interview is.
And in this case, did you see that the apparent initial interview with Mark and Kay and Kylie was conducted at a police station, or at least a place could be video recorded?
Yes.
In a room that is for formal interviews.
Yes.
And yet all of them were interviewed together?
Yes.
Did you understand that to be the first formal interview, as far as you can tell, in the case of these people?
Formal interview. There've been informal conversations before then, where the case was being discussed.
In terms of your investigative, as a police officer, talk succinctly about the tools, and in some cases, maybe the tools that are no longer available to an investigator that police have.
That I, as, and so I'm clarifying the question.
Police have tools such as subpoenas and things.
Yes.
Do they have access to agency databases?
Yes.
Are those databases available to the public?
No.
Some of them. Are some of them protected?
Yes, they're protected.
It can only be used for police work?
Law enforcement only.
Once I've heard you sometimes describe the golden key. Briefly, let us know what that means in terms of police work.
Yeah, when, you know, I term it because of now the last 11 years. When I was a police officer, I had a golden key. I could go and ask for stuff. I had access to databases, law enforcement only databases that gave me all kinds of information. I had the ability, because of the badge, to go and ask you, can I get this from you, or would you provide this to me? You know, and most people would want to cooperate with law enforcement investigations. Now, as a private investigator or in the private field, I don't have that. You know, it's when I give an ask, it's just an ask, and people don't, again, give me the same consideration that I got when I was in law enforcement.
Let's talk about those tools, though. Did law enforcement have the ability to subpoena records?
They do.
Subpoena, including like bank records or personal records, or even communications records, statements, those sorts of things.
Yeah, either, you know, and we've had different, we have the ability to just write a demand letter coming from either the county attorney, district attorney's office, U.S. attorney's office, or we have the ability to get a subpoena and actually compel them to give us that information.
In this particular case, let me move to some support or assistance. Did you see that Detective Barney, whatever her history or her size of Lone Peak Police Department, had support and reinforcement and help from other individuals?
She did.
Who was that?
Richard Hills from the Utah County Attorney's Office.
Did you see work done by Justin Seitsinger?
From the Utah County Attorney's Office.
Another sergeant. I forget, I'm dropping the name. It's no reports. At any rate, these things that you were talking about, these best practices, these expectations, will you expect those resources, someone like Richard Hales, to also understand all that?
Yes.
Is it fair to say that a county attorney's office has a lot of resources
Yes.
compared to the police station, the police offices and things that you worked on, in sometimes more resources in a county attorney's office than a police office has?
Objection calls for speculation, lack of foundation.
I tied it to his history with other agencies and the different sizes of police stations. So you said you worked for all kinds of police entities. Some were small, some were big, right?
Worked with. I worked
with.
Yes, I worked. But yeah, you did have the ability to, you know, again, with in Salt Lake County, we have a district attorney's office. They have resources, abilities, monies that may be available, even skills like writing the subpoenas and demanding those that you could ask for their assistance in fact, regularly did. We also could, you know, if there was a federal nexus or we could get federal assistance, we do the same, whether with the federal agency or the U.S. Attorney's Office, ask for those resources.
Would you expect trained assisting officers or special agents to interject and utilize their best practices when they are assisting another agency?
Yes.
Did you see that in this case?
No.
Did you really ever see Special Agent Hales correct something that Detective Farney may have been engaged in that wasn't best practices?
No.
however, describe the prevalence of Special Agent Hales throughout the course of this investigation. Was he present?
He was present for quite a bit of it once he got involved, yes.
By the way, phones are forensic evidence, right?
Yes.
Phones, describe what kinds of importance phones can have and sort of information. And you can be brief about it because we did hear from Sightseeing.
Yeah, phones provide all kinds of, I mean, we leave a digital footprint that's amazing today. You can retrace what's going on in somebody's life based on the phones.
And are phones available? I'll strike that. We've talked about all these various subjects, and I'm not going to belabor them anymore, but after seeing and evaluating from your expertise, police activity in this case, do you have an opinion of whether or not it was, have an opinion as to it?
Yes.
Would you give that opinion?
This was a poor investigation. It's sad in my opinion with regards to what went on in this police investigation.
Did you believe that when you saw this poor investigation, it could have impacts on the ability to assess the evidence fairly?
Yes.
I don't have anything further. Thank you.
States Cross?
Good morning, or I guess good afternoon.
By 7 minutes.
You and I have not had the ability to speak or meet before, is that right?
No, I'm not sure who you are.
My name is Lauren, I'm one of the prosecutors.
Thank you.
And we have not had that ability because you were involved in another trial up until very recently, right?
Objection, Your Honor. Maybe we should approach for this one? You would love. Is that okay?
All right, you were not present at this scene that we're talking about, right?
Correct.
You did not observe the investigation as it occurred.
No.
You did not collect any evidence yourself.
No.
And in fact, we heard a lot about your history in law enforcement, and I understand it's been a bit since you, I think you said 11 years since you were in law enforcement, is that right?
Yes.
But while you were in law enforcement, and you may have been present in a supervisory role at scenes, you actually have never been responsible for processing a scene yourself, is that right?
No, I have actually as a deputy and as a detective throughout my career. There were times when we would process our scenes. We would also bring in our crime scene units to finish up, photograph, things like that. But collecting evidence, sometimes bagging evidence was my responsibility as a deputy, and sometimes even as a sergeant and a lieutenant. Less as a sergeant and lieutenant though.
Okay. Do you remember testifying in a case? Well, sorry, I'll maybe come back to that.
Okay.
You stated you've never been a homicide detective.
Not been a homicide detective.
Your opinions that you've given on this case are based on your review of reports and materials after the fact.
And my experience in education.
Sure,
Yes.
fair enough. Your role here is you've offered criticism of the investigation. That's all developed in hindsight after reviewing these materials.
I mean, critical decisions and lessons learned based on my opinions that there were gaps. Yes.
You're not offering an opinion on how Casey Terry died.
No.
You're not offering an opinion that this was suicide.
No,
You're not offering an opinion that this was murder.
no,
You agree that those questions belong to the jury.
yes,
In real investigations, and we've heard about your experience, some evidence is missed sometimes, maybe even often some evidence is missed.
unfortunately, yes.
Not every possible item is collected.
Unfortunately, no.
Not every test is performed.
No,
Maybe even natural events outside anyone's control. For instance, like in this case, a flood happened that can unfortunately affect a scene.
yes,
Yet investigations can still reach conclusions
yes.
and they can be accurate.
I'm not sure I would use the word accurate with regard, if a case is, and so I can qualify it, is that if a case is incomplete and things have been missed, I'm not sure within a fairness aspect that it would be accurate. I would use the word accurate. I think people come to conclusions based on a lot of different reasons as to what they believe may have happened, absent a lot of facts and evidence that may have been missed or destroyed or overlooked. That would be a more accurate description
Okay.
from my perspective.
Okay,
Warren.
so you've, as a law enforcement officer, did you see cases through to trial?
Sometimes, yes.
So is it your testimony then that every case that goes to trial, or that is I guess, enough of a full picture of a case that goes to trial, the investigation had to have been absolutely perfect?
So, I want to unpack because that was a long question.
Yeah, I
So,
apologize.
so in my experience, both in law enforcement and now with criminal defense and victim advocacy, is it true that the cases that are incomplete go to trial? Yes, unfortunately, and sometimes to hurt my heart in some cases, but they do. Yeah.
We've talked a lot about best practices, but certainly no investigation is perfect.
Not completely perfect.
There's always something else that could have been followed up on in hindsight.
I mean, there are things that sometimes you wish you could have done better or collected in hindsight. Absolutely, that comes in. But I want to qualify that not every case is mediocre or poor or very good. There are a lot of cases that I've been involved in that are exceptionally great.
Okay, exceptionally great, but have you ever seen an investigation that was perfectly done?
Pretty close, but maybe not perfect.
You said a lot. You don't know what you don't know.
Correct.
Things may be missing and maybe law enforcement's never even aware of it.
Or it's a case I don't have any information about. You're right.
Fair enough. Mr. Williams talked to you a lot about how scenes, right? And how scenes can expand based on what the investigator knows, right?
Correct.
But there are often legal limits on how and when an officer can expand or access a scene.
So I'm going to unpack that a little bit. It doesn't, if an officer believes that the scene should be bigger, but we don't have direct access at that moment to it, it doesn't mean that I can't secure it and go get legal access to that scene. That would be my belief is if I'm expanding to somewhere where I can't be or legally be, I'm still going to secure it until I have the ability to get access to it, or I'm told no.
Okay, and part of that, part of one way of accessing a scene is sometimes you have to apply for a search warrant.
Yes.
Sometimes you may have to try to get consent for a scene.
Yes.
If somebody that has rights to a space, Mr. Williams asked you about that, somebody has rights to a space, you can ask for consent to search the space.
Yes.
And you said that you absolutely would try to do that, right?
Easiest way. Easiest way.
If the person that has rights to a space is in a coma, then that method is not available to you.
No.
You said in this case that you never saw the scope of the area investigated. You said it was never expanded.
Wasn't expanded to what I believe they should have expanded to or could have.
Do you know that the bathroom was in fact searched?
The night that the officers were on scene or later on?
Later at all?
I believe that, yeah, it was searched. I think days later, they went in and looked in the bathroom.
And Mr. Williams mentioned this. It wasn't until an interview with Meggan Sundwall that the bathroom even came up as potentially related to the scene of what happened.
I would disagree with the characterization that it came up. I mean, as a police officer, as a detective and investigator, the proximity of a bedroom, bathroom, the scope of what's going on that night that they are there with the emergency medical. So my belief is that is an important element to find out. You've got an area in proximity to where, she was, that is probably commonly used. Everybody needs a bathroom. To me, that becomes a critical part of where I would be searching and looking for and getting access to.
Sure, ideally, but unless you have legal probable cause that demonstrates that the bathroom was involved.
Object to notion of legal terms. I don't think that's appropriate in cultural respect. There are conclusions that are in fact legal and involve lawyers and judges.
Judge, he's talking about the ability to search places, and he has been involved in law enforcement. Certainly, he knows the hurdles that are involved with the ability to search scenes.
So I would just say with regards to the hurdles there, because of the proximity, again, I can start with the basic. I can ask if there is somebody that has the ability to give me permission for that area or other areas outside of the bedroom. I ask. I also know.
And let me
Go
stop you
ahead.
there, because we covered, someone has rights to a space, but they are in a coma.
Right.
You can't ask, right?
Nope. Then I can apply for a search warrant.
All right, and to apply for a search warrant, you have to have some nexus, some relation, and not just in physical proximity. You have to have some nexus between what's happened and why this new area is related.
Well, and again, Lauren, I'm going to talk about my experience in 36 years and the evolution in the last 11 that I read search warrants. And again, I'm not a lawyer, so if I use the word probable cause, that bar is that we just have to show that there's a probability that area could produce evidence of the crime that we're investigating. And for me to expand, and again, I look at the footprint of that area in the basement and the area surrounding that's all germane to this investigation. And to allow myself to write a search warrant for not only the bedroom, but that expanding area. Somebody has a bathroom, somebody has a common area, somebody has a kitchen, or maybe a living area, or an area outside that may include a deck or a garage or a vehicle. I'm going to include that, and again, a judge is going to make the determination whether I have that. But as an investigator, I'm going to make sure that I'm going to get what I need on that first time first.
Right, but to get what you need, you have to have some nexus or belief that there may be items of evidentiary value in those spaces.
Right.
So we've covered that not the night of, but later on in the investigation, the bathroom was searched, right?
Yes.
The decedent's car was searched.
Yes.
Areas of the kitchen was searched.
Yes.
The fridge in the kitchen was searched.
Yes.
Phones were searched.
Yes.
You cannot say that any alleged investigative shortcoming in this case changed the medical findings.
When you say medical findings, you're talking about the medical examiner's report?
Yes, or toxicology findings.
Well, maybe not toxicology, but I would imagine from the medical examiners, my experience is the medical examiner takes the investigator's information and applies that to what the outcome or what the cause of death could be, or what could be elements of the cause of death. Yes.
Okay, and a medical examiner is responsible for, never mind, I'll strike that. You said yourself that the majority of the text messages in this case you did not review.
Correct.
In fact, you were asked by Mr. Williams not even to focus on that.
Correct.
In addition to physical evidence or evidence that can be physically present at a scene, things like statements from a defendant are evidence.
Yes.
Text messages, certainly between defendant and the decedent, are evidence.
Yes.
And in some cases, evidence like text messages can be extremely significant to the final determination.
They are absolutely. Anything that, again, when we look at the totality of everything that could be evidence, text messages could actually have an impact. Yes.
And not just an impact, they may even be critical
They're
points
very,
of evidence.
at times, text messages are very critical.
So your
I'll add to that, they can help corroborate timelines and other evidence.
Okay. So as I understand your testimony today, you're saying that things were missed and certainly the investigation could have been more thorough.
Significantly more thorough, yes.
And isn't it true of most, if not all, investigations that they could have been more thorough?
Not to the extent of this one, no. There are things that when I look at investigations, there are things that may not be 100% perfect. You ask me, is there a perfect investigation? And I say that in a lot of cases, no. But there are cases that I will say are very good or excellent or exceptional. There are some that are mediocre and fair. And there are others that are poor and sad. And unfortunately, you know, it's in my experience that the higher end law enforcement services, these important cases, I'm seeing, and again, I get involved in, you know, I do about 120 matters a year for the last 11 years, 70% of which are criminal defense, some of which are victim advocacy that I help, you know, law enforcement, you know, make a better case. But it is, you know, within those ranges, you're right, there's no perfect, but I know the difference between something that's exceptional and very good and something that's mediocre or poor.
Okay, and let's talk about, we talked about different types of evidence, right? There's certainly physical evidence that you can find on a scene.
Yes.
There's forensic evidence that you can have, you know, tested.
Yes.
And then there are things like interviews or text messages.
Yes.
And when you look back at the whole picture of a particular case, some of those types of evidence may end up being more illustrative or illuminating about what happened than others.
They absolutely, the presence or absence of them can add to cooperating or adding to a timeline and help make it stronger. Yes.
And in your assessment that this case was poorly investigated, you did not review the text messages?
No.
That's all I have. That's all I have.
Redirect.
Very briefly. The role of the police in the criminal justice system, collecting evidence. Is that what you understand the role of police to be?
It's one of the roles. It's an important role.
When you did your job and as you look at and evaluate these investigations, is it with regard to what can be brought to the prosecutor?
Yeah, it's when you do an investigation, one of the things that I think are lacking sometimes is investigators don't realize what they're thinking about at the end, 2 or 3 years later. Putting this and presenting it not only to the prosecutor, but presenting it in court.
But the role of the police is to bring the evidence available for a prosecutor.
All evidence.
Because the prosecutor has to use that to prove things that happen, right?
Either prove or decide to decline.
A bungled investigation with poor evidence and missed evidence affects the ability to prove things. Can we agree?
Yes.
Nothing further.
Anything else, Ms. Hunt?
No, Judge, thank you.
Thank you. Can this witness step down?
That's my request, Your Honor.
Thanks for being here. Thanks. Step down. Counsel, please approach. Mr. Williams, any additional witnesses?
Your Honor, based on the burdens that apply in the state of the evidence, the defense rests.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we're going to take our lunch break right now. Let's see, how about trying to do math? That's why we all went to law school. 1:45. 1:45, will that work for you? All right, might I remind you, you are admonished. Mr. Williams, any additional witnesses?
Your Honor, based on the burdens that apply in the state of the evidence, the defense rests.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we're going to take our lunch break right now. Let's see, how about
Okay, so the defense has rested in Meggan's case, and they are currently at lunch. What I am going to do is, I think at this point they have rebuttal witnesses this afternoon.
1:45.
I don't see them doing closing arguments.
1:45, will that work for you? All right.
I am
Might
going
remind
to
you, you
close
are
this
admonished by the court that it is your duty not to
We
converse
do
among
have
yourselves
our Hawaii
or
trial that is
converse with
starting in
person on
about
any
30
subject of the
minutes. So
trial,
I
and
want
it
to
is
make
your
sure I have
duty
everything
not
set
to
up for
inform
that
or
one.
express an
And
opinion
then we
on
will
the
come back
cases
into
finally
this
submitted to you. This-
a little later. Okay. So make sure that you have your notification bell on. I am going to drop the link for the Hawaii trial if you want to go over there. But that'll start in about 30 minutes. Because they'll still be at lunch. And I don't want to hold us here and they're going to still be at lunch, kind of, sort of. So that's the link for the Hawaii trial for those that just coming in or would like to go over there. We also have a room open for Sandra Vander Ark, where she starved her son. She's fighting for a new trial. We still have a room open for that. And